Hi, and welcome to Thrive 2020, the conference that's designed to help you live out the gospel in your workplace. And it's all very well to know that we can be a positive kingdom influence where we work, but the question is, well, how? Which is why Thrive is all about encouraging and equipping you into action. This conference is packed with inspirational teaching, deep reflection, and honest discussion. If you're a Christian in the workplace, then this conference might be exactly what you need to help jumpstart your kingdom influence in your place of work. What is Thrive? 6 letters, 6 themes. THRIVE. It stands for teaching, harvest, refreshing, inclusion, vision, and ecosystem. These themes span 8 days. We're talking 12 webinars, 16 speakers, multiple cities in Scotland, all in this one national conference. So, we're so glad that you're here. Check out the program, look at the topics, have a look at the times, see what really speaks to you, and get ready because we're going to be starting very, very soon.
Just great to have you with us for this final session. It makes me almost a tear in my eyes. I think we've made it all the way through 11 webinars, and here we are with the last one on arts and media. And I just want to welcome you to Thrive today, and I hope you've been enjoying it. I hope you've been listening to the speakers and the panelists discuss some really fascinating conversations and topics. So today, arts and media, and I want to welcome our 2 speakers today. Dave McCulloch, or Cully to his friends, and we'll be his friends today, calling him Cully. And Stephen McLeish, great to have you both with us. And Stephen is a pastor in Glasgow, and his art is expressed through the spoken word. And he has a number of videos that you can see on the BBC website, which has poetry along with some great music and videos and very powerful artistic expression about Scotland and mental health and other topics that I'm sure we'll hear about later. Cully is an artist based in Dundee who established Morphe Arts a few years ago and also works on the Numerous project, and we're going to hear a bit about both of those. So yeah, guys, great to see you. Stephen, maybe you could just share a little bit about your story and your artistic ministry.
Hey, hi guys. So good to be here, so thank you for having me on. So as said, I pastor a church called Renew Church. It's actually in Kilmarnock. But yeah, and be in Glasgow soon, so I'm taking that as a prophecy. And I'm also known as a senior pastor and evangelist. But how I do it, I'm not your typical out there megaphone street evangelist. I do it through creativity, through the creative arts. So I do it through spoken word, poetry, video and media and social media, and and travel around speaking on the subjects within that art as well.
That's great. Thanks, Stephen. And Cully, just share a little bit so people know, if they're not familiar with Morphe Arts, a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, well, as you said, I'm an artist. I'm currently artist in residence at Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design, although that was all put on hold back in March. I set up Morphe Arts about 10 years ago with a colleague called Alistair Gordon, and he's based in London. Prior to that, the 2 of us had worked for the Universities and Colleges Christian Fellowship, working with art students. And we noticed when a lot of art students left art college that there wasn't really any support network for them. And so our contracts came to the end of the UCCF, and we set up the charity to support Christians who have got a degree in art across all disciplines, to support them as they make that transition from art education into professional practice. And yeah, I suppose encouraging people that have got a degree to think, okay, we'll stay in the art world, and it's a difficult place to be, as we might end up discussing. So we just felt it was really important to support and mentor people. And then as well as that, we run exhibitions, as well as the mentoring, one-to-one mentoring, different group discussions, exhibitions, critical theory groups and so on around the arts as well, and specifically trying to work within the context of the art world. Yeah.
Wow, sounds interesting. And I'm sure we'll get to some of those topics in a little bit. I should have said, introduce myself. I'm Martyn Link. I was speaking yesterday on energy and climate change. If you missed that one, I work for a big private company, normally out of Aberdeen, but now out of my home, which I've been doing for the last 10 years. And it's a big energy company, and I'm working as the head of strategy for that company. So yeah, it's fascinating to be in this discussion. I do have some artistic traits myself, but nowhere near these two guys. I've written the odd poem now and again, but yeah, it's an area that I find fascinating and I'm really passionate about. And as I was thinking about this session, I was reading in a book called Run with Horses by Eugene Peterson, and you'll know, I think Eugene died either earlier this year or last year, quite recently, a really influential character in the Christian world. And at one point in his book, he writes about this guy that he meets in New York, not a Christian, and this guy that paints his portrait is an artist, and he gets Eugene to sit there for a few weeks while he paints his portrait, and his wife, the guy's wife, keeps coming over and tutting and criticizing the portrait, but Eugene never gets to see it. Anyway, the punchline is that this picture of Eugene is actually what he will become if he becomes a pastor, and his face is all kind of gaunt and pale. It's basically a critique saying, don't become a pastor because you're really a horrible version of yourself. And this guy had a terrible experience in Germany under Nazi Germany, and they're seeing the church basically being carried along with Nazi Germany. And I think what he did with that, Eugene actually took it as a prophetic kind of message, and he kept it in his wardrobe, and he brought it out from time to time, and he looked at it and he says, am I becoming more full of joy, full of love, or less? Am I becoming bitter and cynical? And I think for me, it's almost like your very own picture of Dorian Gray. And I think that for me expresses something of the power of art, really, to influence our future and what we do and the decisions we make. So I think, it's going to be a really interesting discussion, and I'll maybe just open up with a question to both of you. What do artists bring to society? And we'll maybe start with you on that, and then Stephen following that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to follow on from what you mentioned yesterday when you showed The Economist. I don't know if anyone knows that, but you showed that image on the cover of The Economist as a visual reference to how the planet has heated up. Yeah. And it was interesting because it looked like there's an artist called Joseph Albers who's a colour theorist, and it looked a bit like something he might produce. What I found really fascinating about that, what I found really fascinating about that was that you used a visual to help people to think in a different way. And I thought, actually, that's a really good example of, I think, what artists and art brings to society, that it helps people to think and see things in a different way. And sometimes people don't want that, which I think is why art sometimes is seen as a negative thing. But I think more or less that's probably one of its most potent things. There's a writer, a philosopher of aesthetics called Nicholas Wolterstorff, who wrote a book called Art Rethought, The Social Practices of Art. And in it, he's quoting someone else, and he says, I don't believe art can change the world. And, I'm really passionate about art. So when you read something like that, you think, what? And but he says, I don't believe art can change the world, but it can change the minds and the thoughts of people who can change the world. And I think your example of using that visual to help people to think differently about climate change I just thought that was a really good example. So that would be my kind of initial response to that.
Thanks, Cully. How about yourself, Stephen?
Yeah, I would agree with all that. For me, I would say it brings change by being the alternative story. So for instance, when Jesus came, everybody thought he was going to be this king, this political leader, and overthrow the Romans who were oppressing everybody. But it was actually a higher kingdom, and he by changing the society by telling a turned-up story. And I think that is art. Art makes beauty out of mess. So if we think about Michelangelo's statue of David, I mean, that is historic and beautiful piece of art that people all over the world spend a lot of money to go and see it. But at one point, that was just a messy brick. It was just a rock before Michelangelo got his hands on it. And I also think it's the same with people. Like God, he makes beauty out of that ashes. He makes beauty out of that mess. And I think with art, putting that in it, that makes that change in society by creating a culture. I know a lot of you guys are from Aberdeen and all that, and I'm a Glasgow boy through and through. But if Glasgow did not have its buskers, its artists, its Rennie McIntosh architect buildings, or the theatres or the drama schools, it would look very, very different in a cultural aspect. And from my opinion, personally, in a very negative way. So I think it actually creates a beautiful culture for a beautiful future, artists and art bringing that together.
That's great. Yeah, no, I really, really like the examples, and I think you're absolutely right, Stephen. It's adding so much to culture and giving us a much more enjoyable, living experience right across Scotland. And I think we could get into a bit of a Dundee, Glasgow thing going on here, because I know Dundee has certainly stepped up a few gears in the last few years. So yeah, we'll maybe save that for later. But, I mean, it's fantastic. And both of you are kind of communicating things through your art. You have a message that you want to give. You mentioned Jesus' narrative, the eternal message he had. So we kind of recognize that it's trying to tell a story, it's trying to give a message, maybe indirectly to make people think. But then how do you think that kind of communication actually happens? Maybe from your own experience, how does God speak to us through art? How have you seen that happen? And maybe Stephen, if we could, start with you.
I think, he speaks on so many different forms, and I don't think there's one thing, but one of the main things that I think how God speaks is through interpretation of that art. So a lot of times I put my spoken word videos out there, and people kind of attack it because they think I'm meaning it's gospel. Where I'm opening it up for, I want interpretation, I want discussion. I'm just opening up. I'm not saying I'm coming with the answer. And, and I really think there's nothing better than finding the answer or discovering that revelation yourself. As a pastor there's sometimes I can give people answers, but the best and the wins are when people discover that for themselves. That's what university is all about. That's why people struggle. They go from being hand-fed and then they need to self-discover, but it shows they can learn. And you see this in movies all the time, don't you? They go to the art galleries and they're all looking around and they ask that famous question: what does this painting mean to you? And you always get different reactions, different response, and different emotions. Why? Because it's not one fit all. It's not one case fits all. And I think interpretation, that's when God can sometimes speak to us, because he's a creative God. So he lets us discover those answers ourselves. And I think when we do, they become so real. So there's many ways God speaks through art, but for me, it's one of the main ways I've seen is interpretation and discussion.
Yeah, and it's I guess the privilege of the artist really isn't to spend that time thinking on these subjects and really letting them sink deep into your soul, and then it comes out in different forms, different artistic expressions, and that would be a powerful experience. That's great. Thanks. How about yourself, Cully? How would you say God speaks to us through art?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question again, because I was listening to Stephen and then I forgot what the question was. I think one thing I was thinking before when we were talking even about art and thinking about only having an hour to talk about it is kind of trying to define what art even means. And I'm not going to try and define it, but other than when you ask people what they think of when they think of art, a lot of people will come with very different kind of answers or responses to that. And I think there was a time, obviously, when art in the church, and that's something I'm particularly interested in, that's what when I was doing my master's, that was the focus of my kind of thesis, was the relationship between art and the church historically and what it is now. And obviously there was a time when the church employed artists. It was the primary funder of the arts. And but it was then employing artists to tell a particular story, and it was very clear that the story was the Christian message. And obviously the church and art separated, which I won't go into, all the reasons for that, but it's very different now. And I think there's still a kind of harking back, I think, maybe for the church to think, okay, if we use artists, then it's about telling that story, because art doesn't work that way anymore. It's more provocative, it's more questioning, it's not as direct. And so I think that's really important to kind of recognize, okay, what is the art world like now? And I'm more concerned about more contemporary art and art theory on that kind of level, because contemporary art now can be portraiture, it can be landscapes, it can be a whole range of different things, and that's just in the visual arts. And of course then you've got across numerous disciplines, from design to dance to theatre and so on. So it becomes quite difficult then when you try to pin it down. And I think my experience is, and this is maybe, I totally agree with what Stephen was saying, that there is an expectation that the church is looking back to what art was doing in the 15th century. And I think art has kind of moved on from that now in terms of how people see that as a credible thing. And one thing that kind of really helped me to realise that art it doesn't have to be given the answers or be prescribed, is the way that Jesus tells parables. And then, he tells the parable of the sower, and if you've grown up in Sunday school or in church, you probably know the answer to the parable of the sower and what it means. But his original hearers, his disciples, said, what does this mean? And he actually said, why do you speak in parables? And he says, I speak in parables so that people will be ever seeing but never perceiving, ever hearing ever hearing but never perceiving, ever seeing but never understanding. I don't know if I've got those right around. And I just thought, well, God comes in the form of Jesus to the world to talk about the kingdom of God, and he tells them stories that they can't understand. And then at the end he says at the end, the measure you use, that's what will be measured to you and more. So that idea for me of people trying to understand art, and I think people, especially people in the church leaders, have got, the brain capacity to do an exegesis on Daniel or Revelation and so on. So they've got the intellectual capacity and ability to come into an art gallery and put a measure into that, and that measure will be rewarded back. So yeah, that, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's the message can be. It doesn't have to be direct. It doesn't have to be a direct. And for me, it's about opening up conversations.
Well, let's build on that, and maybe just to both of you. I mean, you both mentioned discussion, right? And I think art in isolation, is great, but how do you kind of nurture that discussion so that again, we've said it can be so open-ended in terms of interpretation and what it means, but you have an intent, presumably, when you're creating the art, you have an intent for a message you're trying to say. How do you then engage with your hearers in discussion on your art? I'll just open that up to whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, I think it's about understanding both worlds, really. I again, just when I was doing my master's, I was dealing with this topic of art in the church. And as soon as you bring art, there was a lot of stuff I was reading around. James Elkins, an art historian, wrote a book called On the Strange Place of Religion in Contemporary Art, where he was basically alluding back to the past and thinking, why is this not the case anymore? Because both of those subject matters seem to be really, really important to humanity, but why are they not talking to each other? And I think when you root your learning or your experience in the value and appreciation of what the art world thinks, then it's not like you're just coming with your voice, but you're not considering the other voice. And I just think that's really important for conversation. And that's the thing. I genuinely love art. I'm not thinking, right, I better like art because I'm a Christian, and then I can use art, as a tool for something else. I just genuinely love it. And then you're having a conversation about art or anything, music, the things you enjoy with people. And in the same way, if you could enjoy golf, you'll enjoy chatting about golf and what club you use and all that kind of stuff. And then all the conversations come up. But of course, art's one of those things, maybe a bit different to golf, that allows, because you're talking about life and humanity and what it means. And so it just naturally leads into conversations, I think. So I'm less about trying to use it as a as a tool. It's more just, that's something I really enjoy. But I do think there are opportunities for more Christians to be involved in the arts. That's why we set up Morphe, really, because a lot of Christians maybe don't realise that they can be encouraged to be in the art world. It's kind of like, okay, maybe just come out and work for the church, or so I would say you've got a degree in art, you love it, then engage with that group of people about the things.
Anything to add, Stephen?
That was great.
Well, good. I've got a question for yourself, actually. We've got a few questions coming through from the audience, and we've got a question for Stephen. As a pastor, how do you embrace art in your own church?
So I think we are very fortunate as we also pioneered the church. So we set the tone of the church. We set the tone that, and one of our values is creativity. So I think the hard thing is, maybe if you're a pastor in a more established church that doesn't have that as a value, but that's going to take a long time to change, because it's not just a value, it's culture you need to change. So for us, it's about setting the culture, and that's just one of the cultures that we've set. We believe we serve a creative God, and He works in us and through us, so we should be creative as well.
That's great.
Yeah, and also we've brought in people that are very creative in a church atmosphere, or other creative pastors, just to give that voice in as well and encourage the church.
So you've almost, I guess, given people permission to be creative, and then you're kind of trying to nurture their gifts as well to help them develop in that way. Yeah,
and that can be messy. But
yeah. I guess you have to be willing to take a bit of a risk with art sometimes. It's like experimentation, isn't it, often?
Definitely.
Can I come in on that, Martyn? Just how like my church, it's a church I go to in Dundee, Central Baptist. I was able to use office windows that they had. They were using them for something else, for other posters, which I think I'll show. But what was being really encouraging is, I think that as the leadership there, they've seen the value of what Morphe's doing, and then have given me a facility to work out of that. And there's an opportunity, of course, for the church to engage in it. We do exhibitions and artist talks, and the church people can come to that. There's a message in the bulletin about it, and not a lot of people do come. But the opportunity's there if they do want to. But how the church supports it, I think, is recognising, okay, this is something valuable. This is a valuable ministry, and we can do that. And I think churches, it's not that every church leader or leadership need to be into art. I don't even expect that, but just to recognise that this is a world that's an important part of society. A bit like, again, in your discussion yesterday, what Christian organisations do we know that are leading or that are part of the conversation on climate change, And it's quite similar in the arts. There's not a lot, when people think of arts ministries that are involved in the art world, there's not a lot in Scotland. I think if the church can recognise that that's a vital area of society, in the way that you've got Christians in sport that's not a church, but churches would support that.
Interesting. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions from the floor that we'll answer, and then I'd like to delve a bit more about your life as an artist and your kind of some of your challenges yourself. But this is a tricky one, I think, but maybe not for Cully. We've got a question here. A lot of traditional paintings depict Jesus and others from the Bible as fair-skinned and European in appearance. What impact does the panel think this has? So, Cully, do you have thoughts on that? Has that kind of come across your your thoughts and reflections?
Yeah. We worked with an artist at Nomads Projects, and we looked into, it was around a lot of, so he wasn't a Christian, he wouldn't identify as a Christian, but he had studied theology, and he brought a lot of cases, around liberation theology and coming from different countries as well. So in Africa, how do African people visualize or see Jesus? And so it absolutely is a Western thing to visualize Jesus in a certain way. And actually, I think, there is a real responsibility of artists to, well, of course, would say the Reformation would have kind of pushed against representing God of Jesus in a visual form. But when you go into, like I did a scholarship in Florence a couple of years ago, and it was to go and to see the art and the church and how they related in those days. And of course, what you see is representations of Christianity as it was seen then. Images of heaven, images of hell, images of Jesus, and so on. And those things, I think, absolutely have informed how people think, even what Christianity is and certain beliefs. And if anything, I would say there's, it identifies the power of that influence. And obviously the church had a huge influence on people at that time as well. So yeah, I think it probably needs to be reviewed and really considered again, looking at the text and looking at the images and how well they're represented, and just to not take it for granted that that's how it is.
It does feel like things are changing. We were watching The Chosen last night. I don't know if you guys have seen that. And I find that really, really refreshing how they're portraying first century Israel at that time, and Jesus as well. And I found that really helpful. Stephen, anything to add before we go to the next question?
Yeah, I think it was last week, I put a post on this Dutch artist that kind of studied and got all the technology to show how Jesus would actually look, and that caused a lot of mixed answers. People, I don't care how he looks, it's all about but I think it really plays on people's conscience, because it speaks, that look speaks on the refugee crisis, it speaks on racism, which we all know has been it's been a virus in itself in the past months. But the thing is, and this is my opinion, I absolutely do care what he looks like, because he cares what we look like. I absolutely do, and I think we can learn a lot, as long as we don't miss the heart. I don't think we should just know and miss the heart. I think that is the main purpose, that connected with the heart of Jesus before that. But I think we can learn so much by the visual stuff, the visual of hell, the visual of heaven. You get a real vision of hell, you're never going to want to be there. And then the same, if you get a real vision of heaven, you're going to do anything to get there.
Fantastic. I remember reading Dante's Inferno many, many years ago, and that was pretty scary. Obviously, it's a poem, but it's art speaking to us very powerfully. I've got a question here that I want to ask you guys, and I think it's a really important one, and it is media. We've talked a lot about the arts so far, but the theme is arts and media. I want to touch on media, and the question is the church's often negative opinion of social media alienating younger people? Any thoughts on that one? Maybe Stephen, you might want to go first. I don't know.
I think lockdown's forced the church to embrace media. So which has been great for people like me, who has always been on social media, and there's always been that going against the grain, and it's kind of they're embracing it. So I think it's actually, there's good came out of that sense, that the church are actually saying, because if you don't have any media, a lot of people's online services were not happening. To see the value of it, saying, oh, hey, if a crisis does happen, we're in a very fortunate day and age that we can actually jump on a laptop, have conferences like this, get the gospel out there. So I think people just don't, everybody wants change, but nobody likes change.
That's a great answer. Cully, any thoughts on this one?
Just say the question again, Martyn.
This was about the church's often negative opinion of social media. Is it alienating younger people?
Yeah, I don't know if I actually know I could answer that actually, but I think what I for us as an organisation to have gone into lockdown, where a lot of our gatherings have been in person, we've been able to meet online. And we do monthly lectures called the Make Good Lectures. And they normally happen in London. There might be 40, 50 people attend those. But since we've gone online in lockdown, there's been over 100 people. And it's been able to reach, obviously, people in Scotland can join in, and even nationally and internationally as well. So those things can be good. There's no doubt about it. But we, as one of our discussions as part of the Morphe Glasgow group in Edinburgh, we've got a couple of different groups there. We talked about surveillance capitalism, and the importance of privacy and data and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, as artists, you kind of want to be aware of that as a tool, and it can get you business and so on and so forth. But trying to have integrity as you deal with those things, knowing exactly what they are, and that just takes a bit of research. And sometimes it's easier just to go on Zoom. Like we use Zoom, for instance. I shouldn't be advertising it now, but
there are other options.
I don't know if they need any more advertising. And then suddenly it was like, wait a minute, how much integrity does Zoom have, compared to Google or whatever? Are they keeping our data? Are they listening to the conversation, and so on? So I think we need to care about those things in the same way that we care about the climate or anything.
Yeah, it's a great answer, and I want to continue on that theme of lockdown, pandemic, etc. But I think one observation I would have is, there's no one channel or medium of art that speaks to everyone, is there? I mean, you guys would agree with that, and so my answer to the question might be, we have to understand, as well as, I guess, what you were saying earlier, Cully, you're following your passion. You have a passion for visual art. You're following that passion. Stephen, you've got this gift for spoken word. That's your avenue, as it were. And it's almost, there'll be certain people who that resonates with, and other people it'll just pass by. And I think, if we want to encourage and inspire our young people, we need to think, well, what channels, what avenues do they listen to? Do they watch? And find the people who are passionate about them, and encourage them to engage. That would be, one way of looking at it. Good. Okay. Well, let's think about the lockdown, global pandemic, remote working. You mentioned it a little bit. What messages do you think art has for this current season? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, and a tough question at the same time. Yeah, I would say. Lockdown, you're boxed up. It was like on house arrest at one point. But what it actually did, it made you think, not even just outside the box, like there was no box. Because for your art, or even in a church sphere, how to reach people for Jesus, you have to think differently. How do we reach people that nobody's reached before? We need to do things we've never done before. And I think that did come out of lockdown, that we really got that. But through the whole crisis aspect to it and the pandemic aspect to it, I think what art really done was it became because there's a lot of trauma. This is something the system, and then unfortunately we're probably going to see people affected mentally, PDS and trauma through this crisis. But one thing I think art does is the healing oil. If you think about, I always think of the Captain American movie. How, I don't know if you're I'm sure you've seen that movie, but where Captain Rogers, and he's Captain America now, but gets sent in to entertain the troops. But it's still the same. That does actually happen. We do. I have friends that go over to the war zones, and they're not in the actual force or the army or anything like that. They're there to entertain because these guys need relief. And so I think that's the same with this, that there's going to be a lot of relief. And this has happened in the past when we went through world wars. It was to keep people in a good way to switch their mind off from the trauma that was actually happening. And I think in a sense there's a lot of healing with that. And on the terms of remote working, I think with Artlist or just anyone who's remote working, it kind of made people say, hey, actually, we don't need to do things the way we've always done it, from an employee perspective and also an employer perspective. You know, some employers like maybe spending, I don't know, a couple of, you Martyn will probably know more about this, but probably spending millions on a building for offices per year.
Yeah.
They're probably thinking, hey, wait a minute, we could maybe cut those over costs. And then I also think the people who are working from home are saying, oh, actually, I'm not a robot, I have free will. So I think it's creating a sense of freedom as well if we let it.
Good. Thanks, Stephen. Any thoughts on the lockdown, the pandemic?
Well, obviously, I'm working with artists, and I think, you know, a lot of charities, we're a charity, and a lot of charities we're able to put staff on furlough. And I think it just became clear almost from the word go that we couldn't go on furlough because actually artists need more support now than ever. So we actually set up various just different ways of showing support. So obviously we're a Christian charity, so we set up just a morning prayer time. So that and that's continued actually. I mean, we're still in lockdown, of course, as well. But so we've been, you know, since March, we've been doing that in the morning. But also a lot of people lost jobs. So artists, you know, often need a supplementary complementary job to sustain an income as well as their art making. And so most are in the hospitality industry, you know, so working as an artist, but also another job in hospitality. And of course, both of those just came to an end. So a lot of people had no income at all. And we set up a benevolent fund to support artists, and we raised about £25,000, which was absolutely amazing. So there was people out there that were willing to support artists, and then people can apply for a grant, and we're giving out grants of £200. So if there's any artists out there that are struggling, they can get in touch because that's still available. So I think it's also become apparent that and you know it just even in the media about the theatres and comedy, performing arts in particular. So we know that society's struggling, you know, with this as well. And I think so I'm part of what's called the Cultural Agencies Network in Dundee, which includes, you know, the V&A and the DCA, to the tourist industry, to the McLeish Gallery, and then it's Nomads Projects and Sharon Hording. I'm there as a kind of artist-run gallery space. And what I found really encouraging was this is a bunch of art running cultural and artist projects that are not Christians, but how much they care about the city and how much them coming together can say, okay, how are we going to help the city? And I thought, wow, that's what we should be doing as Christians. You know? And it was encouraging to see it, that these people are passionate about it. And I just thought it's good for us as Christians to be part of that and contributing. I just think that's really important because the need's there. And as Steve mentioned, I think the need's going to be ongoing because people are going to struggle, not just financially in jobs, but in terms of their security, even their kind of mental well-being and so on as well. I think everyone realises the importance of the arts. You know, the National Theatre were putting on free, you know, you could listen in free. And everyone's, of course, watching more films and Netflix and stuff like that. Netflix now.
We're running out of films, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see what art comes out of this current season, won't it? I mean, you know, a lot of the, I guess for a lot of artists, there's a gestation period, isn't there, where you're absorbing, you know, the environment, you're listening to what's happening, and then it's kind of, I presume, kind of working its way around your brain, and then eventually it'll come out in a different way next year, probably. So
there's a lot of the RSA in Edinburgh put out an open call for artists to respond to lockdown, and I'm working on a project for Tonic Arts, which is Edinburgh and Lothian Health board, working on a project for a hospital, which is response to Life Under Lockdown as well, with 7 other artists or 6 other artists. So, people are asking artists to respond to that. And some artists don't want to respond yet. But I think inevitably it's going to come out. And I read an article in The Guardian, I put it in my notebook, I'm starting my notebook. It says, do uncertain political times always result in great art? And it was kind of contrasting the 70s when things were difficult to the 90s, and saying actually in the 90s there was a lot of creativity happening. So it doesn't necessarily conflict, and difficulty doesn't necessarily lead to great art any more than other times. But it also does. Yeah.
We're getting a few questions coming through from the audience, so I want to pick your brains about a few of these. This is just open forum for whoever wants to answer. What are the panel's opinions about the ownership of art and meaning after its release publication to the public? Any thoughts on that?
I think, Tully, I think that one's for you.
Well, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Stephen, about when you write a poem or something like that, and there's the sense that once it's written and goes out there, you can have a certain idea of why you're writing it and so on. And we know that even from kind of literary theory, that once it goes out there, the author now no longer has a say in it. So I mean, that's kind of legitimate. But I do think from, going back to Jesus telling the parables, that he was happy for people, well, not happy, but he allowed people to investigate if they wanted to. He almost set it up, people to come and investigate if they wanted to. And if they didn't, the richness was in the investigation. And I think that can happen. Often you don't get a chance to meet the artist and talk to the artist, which is why with Nomad's projects we do an artist talk, because I think you can gain so much more insight into, not necessarily this is what this means, this is why I used that colour, that's why that shape's there, that's why I use these words, but more just thinking about their ideas and what drives and motivates them. And then those conversations can get to actually the heart of deeper things. So yeah, ownership, I think once it goes out there, I think the artist it's open.
Open season. Good. There's another one here. Since the arts have such an important role in society, how can Christians best support and bless the artistic community as a whole? Good question.
Yeah.
Who wants to?
Thanks, Stephen. I've got a response to that, but I'll let you go, Stephen.
Okay. I think, and my biggest thing is I don't think it is celebrated enough by our Christian community. As I think it's getting better, but I don't think it is. Let me give you an example of this is when someone who's going in the mission field or they're going to seminary or Bible school, we celebrate that. We commission pastors and evangelists or ordain them, whatever your church language is. But I also think that, your workplace is in the marketplace is your ministry as well. That we should be commissioning not even just artists, but artists and poets and architects and
politicians.
Politicians, and my goodness, do we need more of them? That we should be as a church, we should be celebrating that and commissioning that, because I think a lot of people come to one of my pastor friends told me there was a young girl who says, I want to dance in church. And he was like, well, we don't. And this is just a first time person. He's like, well, we don't really do that here and stuff. But and you just see, he said he's seen her face drop and says, but why don't you go and start a dance school? She went out there and reached more people than she ever could stage for 5 minutes on a Sunday morning.
Wow.
I think it's just opening it up. Like, we are called to go out there.
Brilliant. I think that's a brilliant answer, Stephen. Who was that? Was that someone in your church? That's the story of that girl.
No, that was actually a church over in Ireland.
Right. Okay. Because that's amazing, and that's what I would advocate. That the church it's not just commissioning for the church. or artists for the church. I think the churches might be more likely to support artists for the church and pay for it. But artists need studios, artists need spaces to work, and they need the finances to be able to do it. I think there needs to be a kind of a relationship of trust there that allows that to do, And I think like Central Baptist obviously have given me their office windows and they allow me to use it. So even just like having that is great. It's a space, and we show probably more people that aren't Christians than are, and I think the church is just giving me that space allows that to happen. And obviously, as a charity, we've been going now 10 years, so there's a sense of we've been able to do the job for that long, and I think it's easier for maybe churches to be able to trust that what we're doing is worthwhile. But we need support, even just as crudely as we need financial support to make that happen. And I think that's one way the church can help. I know like churches of Scotland as well have got buildings, and spaces. I went to a gig in Glasgow at St Luke's, and it's now just a kind of restaurant, kind of music venue. And I think actually, can the church let artists use spaces? That if they've got spaces, let artists use them in that way as well. So, yeah.
It's an interesting one, thinking about property and real estate, and how you use that. And certainly when I started working in Aberdeen, my walk to work, I passed about 4 churches that were no longer churches. One was a nightclub, and one was just shops. And I think, it's an interesting change in our venue now. We're all at home. So again, we're all distributed, and it's, when we're back together physically, we need to think about how we use that venue. Good. Okay, so there's a couple more questions to think about. And I want to get on to some final questions as well. So the areas of art and entertainment are very closely linked and extremely influential in the world. How do you think Christians can bring kingdom values through these areas to the world?
I'll let you take the lead on that, Kelly. You're raring to go with that.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know if this is something we've maybe chatted about earlier in terms of how you actually physically represent kingdom values. Does it have to be represented with clarity in the art form? So if you're writing a song, does it have to, be clear what those kingdom values are? Obviously, if it's not in content, then it's how you go about your work, even professionally.
Yeah.
And how you represent God, Jesus, within the context of how you work. So for us running the gallery, it's about how we work with the people. So relationship is one of the key things for me, that people know that they will be looked after within the context of working with us in the gallery. And I think kingdom values can come out in the ways that we live. And that's not to say that it can't come out in content or shouldn't come out in content. So I'm not kind of saying that it shouldn't be in our content, but if we are going to put it in our content, it has to be appropriate to the context. I was talking about church and faith, like so clearly in my thesis, in my master's thesis in that year, but it was within the context of artistic academia as well, and the relationship to that. So I was able to do it boldly because it was within the appropriate context. So I think that's important if we use it as a content.
It's almost like there's no jarring between the art and the message. They're kind of, aligned. So they're not kind of, this is a bit inappropriate. And
people can tell if it's not, if it's polemic about any subject, if it's about, I won't say a subject, but whatever subject, anyone can go, yeah, that's just a polemic message, and it doesn't fit.
Stephen, any thoughts?
I think what Cully said about relationships is very, very key. We should all be walking kingdom values, not just on a Sunday. They should be just part of our DNA. But what I would hope is that we should be everything in terms of art that the world does, but better. I don't mean that in an arrogant sense, I mean that in a confident sense that God's called us to be. Because, for example, the world is connected to a design. The difference is a design. We're connected to the designer, God. So there's that. So I really believe the church should be the epicenter and the creative hub to sometimes actually give answers to some of our biggest needs.
Yeah.
In the city and our towns. And I also think they are dark and be the light in that dark. Don't become the dark, but be the light in that dark. Because what light avoids, darkness invades. I really believe that what light avoids, darkness will just invade in that place. So I think we need to go and be the light in these places. That's why I work with Christian organisations, but a lot of secular organisations. And for me, it's about being. I think when you go where your light is going to be the brightest, it's the easiest way to discern your call.
Yeah. Can I just come in on that, just to follow up what Stephen said about the church? So this is a quote from Robert L. Short, who wrote a book about peanuts, the parables of peanuts, Robert L. Schultz. And he says, if the church fails to use the divine imagination given to it, it will constantly be embarrassed by a world capable of far more imagination than the church itself. And I think, being part of the Cultural Agencies Network, it's about saying, okay, what do we as Christians bring to this? If they've got this care for the city and the arts and how that it can benefit people within the city, how the Christians, I think, again, going back to what someone had asked about, how can the church support this? And I've mentioned kind of finances or space, but it's about saying, okay, we need to support Christians to be in the art world. How many Christians do we know are actually, on that kind of, at that kind of level of influence? And we can do that just on small influence with our family, or just with the small group of people around us. But it can be on a city level, and I think the church kind of, rather than stepping out of the art world, just needs to, if it doesn't do it like as the church, but it enables other Christians to do it, a bit like what you said about that girl, being encouraged to go and start a dance school.
I mentioned this yesterday, actually. I've been reading Centre Church by Tim Keller, and he has a really interesting approach to the gathered and the scattered and church and who should focus on what. And I think, it's sometimes a case of, we sometimes wait for the gathered church to do things that the scattered church should be doing, and vice versa. And, that your example, Stephen, of the girl, go and do it and we'll bless you and support you. You go out into the world, you be the scattered church, in your sphere of influence, and we'll pray for you, we'll, encourage you. And then the gathered church can pastor people, it can love, it can care, these really strong values. It can be creative, and that getting that balance right is really, really important, I think. Yeah. No, good.
It is really important, Martyn, that if we are encouraging people to be in the art world, that it's a Christian place to be, And that, again, that's one of the kind of emphasis of Morphe is we want people to be in that world, but it's a difficult world to be in, so people need support. There's someone I know who was in kind of dance and theatre, and she was in a company doing a project, and I think out of the 24 people there, there was maybe 4 that weren't gay, and she was a Christian. And someone afterwards, she said she was a Christian, and someone afterwards said, "Why are you even here?" And not in a sense of you shouldn't be here, but like, I wouldn't expect you to be here. And of course, if you're in that environment, and you go on tour for 3 months in that environment, that with no kind of Christian support, that'd be difficult, But I was saying to her, I don't want you to come out of that world, but maybe in 2, 3, 5, 10 years time, that group, But yeah, people need support if they're going to be out in the world. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just broaden that into a question, about the challenges and pressures Christian artists face in the arts community. Stephen, have you got thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I wrote some notes because that was so we actually talked about this, and I'm passionate about this because I've got a lot of friends and a lot of people I reach are professional stand-up comedians.
Wow.
And there was this big hoorah where Creative Scotland came up with self-funding, but says that, comedy isn't an art form. And, they had to fight against that, and they says there was all that argument that that it didn't bring that much into economy lives because Kevin Bridges sells out, the biggest arena in Glasgow for 18 nights in a row with people spending economy in hotels and restaurants and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's about, sometimes people don't define it, and a lot of people don't see it as a real job, and you make it big.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. And I think with artists, there's a bit of burnout because the financial pressure, we need to keep gigging, or the social media, I need to keep engaging with my fans. And instead of us using social media starts to use us. And I think bitterness then comes, and artists might think it's due to the art, but it's not. I think it's more to the circumstance and the situation. I don't have any time to do my art. I think this so can be more support in making that happen. And I think just try to see if I wrote anything. I think a big thing. I don't know with with more traditional art, but I'm sure it's the same. My art's on social media. But there's absolutely no training whatsoever. How do you deal with internet trolls? How do you deal with criticism? How do you deal with haters? But also how do you deal with praise? How do you deal with being overwhelmed? So, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I had 3 videos that went viral in 1 week. Worst week of my life. I didn't know a human being isn't created to be under that much pressure, whether it's good or bad. But there's not that much training the people that's went through that, and also experts to say, hey, this is how you deal with this mentally. This is how you can respond positively in this situation to keep your well-being in check and your health in check.
Just something that might help with that, Stephen. So we produced some resources, Bible studies for artists, Bible studies for designers, Bible studies for writers, and they, there's nine studies in each one, roughly. But they are kind of like an understanding of how to deal with success, how to deal with failure, practical things like that, but looking at it from a biblical point of view. And they'll be on our website, looking for that, because it is really important that people are, if they're going to be in that world, then how do they understand the biblical worldview that helps them to deal with those kind of practical things? Yeah,
it's good. That's really good, guys. And it'd be great when Cully's our exhibition goes viral. He knows who to phone for advice now.
Yeah.
So just as we come to close, is there one thing we could pray for you guys each, just to share? And then I've got a couple of just 60 seconds to close out at the end. So just briefly, is there a prayer point for each of you that we could pray for?
Stephen?
For me, it's just wisdom. More wisdom, then even more wisdom.
Thanks.
Very good, Solomon. I better ask for that as well.
Money.
Yeah. No, I think pray for artists. Obviously, I'm working with artists who are really struggling at the moment, so that's just absolutely key at the moment, that artists are struggling, and for the decision makers in education and funding for the arts as well. I just think it's vital for our society. The arts are included.
Yeah, let's bless the artists. Good. Well, thanks, folks, and it's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure everyone's enjoyed it. Some great questions as well. Yeah. And I just want to say thanks to you both, and thanks to all the speakers that we've had. I think we've had 16 different speakers. We've had people behind the scenes. Give a shout out to George and Jason behind the scenes, done a fantastic job. All the audience, we've had hundreds of people engaging on social media, many people on the platform. So just thanks to everybody for thriving together. And who knows what's next, but please pray for us as we think about what to do and where to go next. I did want to finish. We started with Jeremiah 29 verse 7, which you'll be familiar about, bless the city that Jeremiah prays. I want to finish with Jonah 4:11, which says this: and should not I have concern for the great city of Nineveh? And this is God speaking, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals. And really the observation at the end is, we should be concerned. You mentioned it earlier, Cully. We should be concerned for our cities. We should be concerned for everybody who doesn't know Jesus, that they would have a better understanding, and that we might help them, and our cities thrive and our nation thrive. So, I think we have a purpose. We have a purpose to be more like Jesus. But what we're looking for, and each of us have been speaking about this, is our calling. What is our individual calling for our lives, and how can we bless the scattered church in that calling? Whether you're a teacher, a politician, an artist, a scientist, whoever you are, we want to find that calling. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Cully. Thanks, Stephen. And
I'll be in touch, Stephen.
yeah. Have a great day, folks, and thanks for dialing in.
Thanks a lot, Martyn. Thank you.
Thank you.